I'm ready whenever you are, man.
Well, hello. This is the first full-length episode of Get Behind Me, Jesus, and I'm joined by my friend Josh Patterson. Josh is a deep thinker and independent theologian and the host of the Rethinking Faith podcast. He's a former pastor turned brewer turned podcaster with a love for process and relational thought, radical theology, and the mystics. He's also a hardcore and emo fan, a hockey fan, a WWE aficionado, and an all-around great guy. I'm so excited to have him as my first guest. Josh, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm excited. This is going to be fun. I know we've been kind of talking about your idea for your podcast for a while, so I'm happy to see it being actualized.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's been quite a journey. I'm excited to be doing this right now, and if nothing else, it's just for me. So I'm gonna have fun with it.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool. I'm excited, man.
Yeah. So on that hardcore and emo fan note, I was listening to some 90s hardcore to sort of get myself stoked and ready for this conversation. And I came across Ringworm. I don't know if you're familiar with Ringworm. But they've got a song. Yeah, they've got a song called Numb, Blind to Faith. And at one point, he's screaming, "I'm pierced by an unholy cross. I'm pierced by the symbol of a God I can't call my own." And I was like, okay, I'm not going to listen to anything else because like that's perfect for the theme. Pierced by the really symbol of a God I can't call my own.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
But that's kind of the idea behind the Get Behind Me, Jesus podcast is, getting away from the white evangelical Jesus, the Jesus that I grew up with, looking for a God that I can call my own, so to speak.
Yeah, that's beautiful, dude. I like that. The way that I've come fond of saying it, and I definitely stole it from someone. I don't know who. I might be stealing language from Tripp, which is a common thing that I do. But looking for a God where I can say I believe in God without having to cross my fingers.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Speaking of Tripp Fuller, everybody, most of whoever's going to find this podcast will be familiar with those influences, but I guess it's like best practice to explain who we're talking about. So
yeah.
I was just listening to Tripp and Ryan Burge yesterday. His latest podcast was The Election and Religion Postmortem.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about the identity crisis in Christianity. They were going over all of these charts, and we're in this position now, or evangelical Christianity is in this position now where they've shifted majorly to the right. He was talking about the dissonance between laity and leadership. The leadership wants to go a certain direction. They want to be more progressive and they want to talk about issues, but the laity doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the percentages really bothered me. And that's the whole reason why I feel compelled to do this and jump in this space, because I feel like there really is an identity crisis. The laity, they're not concerned with social justice and some of those things as much as the church leaders. And so you have this problem where, especially for congregational type churches, where there's not a lot of influence or actual enforcement of denominational standards, where you've got the denomination that says we're pro-LGBT, we're pro-immigrant, but then that's not the culture of the local church. And so you've got people coming in that, like Tripp was talking about when he was out of UCC in California. It was when Prop 8 was struck down. And so they put out a whole ad campaign advertising to queer families to come to the UCC and to be a part of this faith community. But on the local level, you have people showing up and coming to these churches where the pastor doesn't know what to say, and the people don't really agree with the denominational stance, and so they felt like they were advertised something that the local church couldn't deliver.
Yeah, that reminds me of so I won't say their name because the story was, shared in confidence, but I have a friend who still works in ministry. They are like, the lead pastor or whatever. And they recently had somebody quit the I'll just call it a leadership team, because if I start using too specific language, people can piece together what, denomination and stuff I'm talking about. But like a leadership team made up of laity. This person quit during one of the meetings, and the charge brought against my friend was, all you care about is widows, orphans, and poor people. And my friend was like, this is why you're angry? And I told them, I was like, well, dude, that's like a pretty good, if someone gets pissed at you for caring too much about widows, orphans, and poor people, I think you're doing your job correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's, like, that disconnect as you're talking about is mind. And like, it just, it kind of blew my mind to hear that. Even in like this church's, it has a mix of people, but overall, I would say it's a more fairly progressive church. And for that to be like a sticking point is kind of crazy to me.
Yeah. So at some point, the church got stuck in self-preservation, and for some reason, that's what a lot of laity are concerned with. How do we keep this community alive? And they're not talking about the community around them, but they're talking about, this church that's been around for 20, 30, 50 years, that means something to them or their family or something like that. Like, the legacy should be the care of the orphans and the widows and the poor, like that. There's direct continuity there.
Yeah. Yes.
With the teachings of the person that they say that they worship.
You would think.
Anyway, yeah. So let's solve all these problems.
Got it. All right.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
That's what we're going to do here. So I've got a couple of questions, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. First of all, I do want to introduce everybody to you. If there's a chance that I'm catching people, who aren't familiar with you or Trip or, things like that, I want to make sure that we're pointing them in the right direction and giving them, a good idea of who you are and what you like to talk about. So for those who might be new to your work, could you share a bit about your own journey of rethinking faith, and what were some of the pivotal moments or questions that led you down this path?
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, I was just writing down your question. Because I have ADHD and it's helpful for me to remember. But so I grew up within kind of nominally Christian household, and then that shifted. My parents did this like Christian retreat and then got like kind of more serious about things. So I kind of always like grew up around Christianity. Specifically, we were in a Methodist church for a hot minute, and then when my parents discovered the wonders of early 2000s contemporary Christian music, we moved to the Southern Baptist Church down the street because they had that. And actually, when we were there, my brother Jordan, I'm the oldest of three, four. I have an adopted sister as well. But when Jordan came out in 7th grade as gay, we were kicked out of our Southern Baptist church. The pastor literally told my family, like, you guys are no longer welcome here. So we left, obviously, and kind of bounced around and ultimately ended up in like non-denominational spaces. And so I, out of college and stuff, I worked for Youth for Christ. So I graduated and then thought fundraising my own salary would be a good idea right after I got married straight out of college. Yeah. Which again wouldn't recommend. So like I did that, and then I left Youth for Christ, and I took on my first job as a pastor, a teaching pastor in a church in Boca Raton, Florida. So my wife and I were from Maryland. We moved to Florida, and that's kind of where things started to make some pretty big shifts for me. During my time in that church, I experienced verbal, emotional, spiritual, and borderline physical abuse at the hands of the founding pastor and my direct report. So that started to break some things for me. I would say it was pretty pivotal. I developed like pretty bad depression. My anxiety got really bad. Even to this day, although it's gotten so much better, it kind of ruined my trust in like male authority figures. It's difficult for me to be in a room alone with just like a male authority figure. But anyway, it didn't really like start to have me question faith stuff. I just thought like this is just one bad example of a church like that sucks. And so I left and I went to a Methodist congregation as a youth pastor, which I mean, it was fine. It was a lot better than the first church I was at, but it had some issues of its own, mostly like a very toxic and unhealthy staff culture.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of some of the congregation also had some not great stuff going on. But it was there actually that I got to work in a church for the first time that was open and affirming. I met a really good friend there named Chad, who is an openly gay man. He was the worship director. And so that was a really important thing for me in my own kind of journey up until that point. I don't know, I had almost, I think they call it like side B Christians, where the understanding is that like, LGBTQ folks are, welcome. It's not a sin to be gay or anything like that, but like don't act on it basically.
Right.
And it was actually in this Methodist space that started to break for me. And my friendship with Chad is just wonderful. And so that was a major kind of shifting point as far as the LGBTQ inclusion stuff goes. And I ultimately ended up leaving that church, coming back home to Maryland and working as a high school and young adult pastor at a church in Gaithersburg called Seneca Creek Community Church, which was an amazing experience. The staff there was wonderful. The head pastor, Mark, is a great dude. Still friends with him to this day. But the damage had already been done, so to speak, and I was actively in that moment experiencing what we're calling today as deconstruction, and it was a mess. So ultimately I decided it would be best to leave vocational ministry, and that took about 8 months with the spiritual director and meeting with my direct report, Pastor Jeanette. She was instrumental in helping me through that, and that's how I became a brewer and stuff. So those are some major shifts, but as a podcaster, I actually started the podcast when I was at the Methodist Church in October of 2018, which is crazy. That's coming up on 7 years of doing it.
Yeah.
But I started it with my buddy Andy, and it used to be called Theology Doesn't Suck. And the goal of it was we wanted to demonstrate that people with very different theological perspectives. So I was like an edgy evangelical at the time, and Andy was kind of like Westminster Confession or bust. Hyper-reformed Calvinist type. And that worked for like 30 episodes, and then he quit and, called me a heretic and stuff, which is fine. And yeah, it continued to shape and grow over time. I got very interested in open and relational theology, which then led me into process theology. That's probably been one of the biggest shifts in my thinking was, as we kind of mentioned earlier, being able to come to an understanding of God where I didn't have to cross my fingers. And so I find that within the world of process thought. So a lot of the kind of work that I do is in that space. But also radical theology has been really big for me more recently, I guess for about, a little over a year now. And there's a lot of interesting things that radical theology and process share that overlap, but also they're very different, because within process, it's a constructive philosophical theology, whereas radical theology is inherently deconstructive in a philosophical sense, taking after people like Derrida. So that's kind of the work that I do, is inviting people into these, into these spaces, trying to make room for big questions without giving stupid answers.
Right.
And trying to create an inclusive space. So I do a lot of work with LGBTQ inclusion. I'm big on like being racist is a bad thing, which fits in nicely with your show, kind of decolonizing our faith, getting away from the kind of white Jesus and this white American evangelicalism and exploring the broader tradition, those kind of things. So that's what I'm doing. I guess I'm, kind of on the outer edge of the Christian faith, as Richard Rohr might say. But I don't know. I kind of see myself and my work as kind of a bit of an iconoclast, or even, to use a more radical word, a parasite that kind of feeds off the tradition, but not in a sense because I hate the tradition. I love the Christian tradition that I came from, and the kind of radical nature of it is meant to be a disruption in service of the tradition.
Right.
To hopefully call it back into what it could be. So anyway, that was a long answer, forgive me, but that's a bit about me and what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So you're kind of like a radical modern monk, you know.
Yeah.
You're your faith experience and in the things that you're teaching and engaging are for the benefit of the tradition.
I would hope so. Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do. I get accused of being against the tradition, but that's not my intention.
No, I think that's just sort of the position that you're put in as somebody who's asking questions and dealing with things that are outside the norm or on the periphery, like Richard Rohr would say. He That's funny you bring up Richard Rohr. He would say about Catholicism that the tradition was so big that there was space for people like him and traditions like his to be on the margins. I came from a tradition, the Church of the Nazarene, like Tom Ward. So it's a small evangelical tradition. It's not main. Well, I mean, I guess it's mainline, but it's not like United Methodist. So it's not quite as big. It's a little more niche. There definitely wasn't space within that tradition for me to be on the margins. The margins were already pretty paper thin in terms of, whether or not you're in or out. I actually got sort of kicked out of my denomination because of my support for LGBTQ community. I was asked to be the sponsor of a student youth group. And I was staff at the time at the university. And I was like, this is fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to do that. And basically that just meant being there and being present so that they had, not legally, but based on the policies of the university, they had to have somebody that was sponsoring and sort of responsible for the group to be able to exist. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'll be that person for you. And then I thought foolishly that I could reconcile that with what I was doing at the time, which was kind of the youth pastor, associate pastor at this church. And the head pastor was actually the head of the ordination committee. And so that year when I went in for my ordination interview, it should have been the year that I was ordained. He was like, these questions about the queer community and this thing that you're doing, I don't think this lines up with the denominational position. And I'm sitting there like, you haven't given me a chance to explain how this lines up with a denominational position. But he decided that basically I was outside the bounds of what was acceptable and that I would not be ordained. So that's what lost me my connection to the Church of the Nazarene.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate, man, because like I don't know, I think it goes to show like there's, people like yourself or, people like Tom Ward, as you mentioned, who, as I'm sure you're aware, just went through like a heresy trial, which is wild to say. We're, in 2024, the heresy trial. But it really does, like, it costs people real things to stand up for what you believe in and, be a voice for those whose voice are taken away. And so I have a lot of respect for people like you, who lost things for standing up for what you believe in. It's admirable.
This episode is about you, but we definitely like it changed everything. Our life was completely ruined. I mean, I thought I was going to be ordained. I was not ordained. We wound up leaving the church and going to a United Methodist campground in Washington State, where we thought we could sort of escape some of the drama that we had been experiencing. And it turned out things were just as bad there. So yeah, we literally traveled across the country, left everything that we had behind. We lost all of our community and then ended up in a place where we couldn't find those things again. It's just been this wild ride of trying to find the things that the church had always promised, but never could deliver. And then just sort of being on our own and trying to figure that stuff out on our own. So how has hosting Rethinking Faith shaped your own understanding of faith, spirituality, and community is what I'm interested in, what we're talking about.
Yeah. So it's interesting because Rethinking Faith kind of it's basically served or what it's become is like kind of me wrestling through my faith and spirituality in like a very public kind of way. And I came to adopt this phrase that I say on the podcast all the time, and people probably are sick of hearing it. But I was told by someone much wiser than myself, and he said, Josh, there's an invitation in life to go deep enough into your own story that other people might find themselves there as well. And I really kind of took that seriously, and that kind of shapes and guides rethinking faith. And so I think, you said, ask like, what kind of things have I learned? Yeah, I think I've learned most that like the more I know, the less I know. Like the more I learn about, the less I actually know. And hopefully it's given me some intellectual humility in spiritual spaces. It's convinced me more and more things like theology and spirituality really matter, that they're powerful. And yeah, they're tools that can be abused, absolutely, as you and I have both experienced, but also they're tools that can bring about human flourishing and love and, those kind of things. And so I've grown a deeper appreciation for theology and philosophy. And like I said, it's important. I think I've learned that like there are still really cool people in the world, which can be helpful, especially in times like, today. So getting to meet and talk with all these different cool Bible scholars and theologians and philosophers and psychologists, whoever it may be, has just been neat. Kind of give me some hope, in humanity moving forward. But I mean, community, I'm glad that you brought up that word, because I think that's a really important piece of this, because you mentioned losing your community. And I think for me and for many people, that's one of the most difficult aspects of, when people experience faith shift or deconstruction or get kicked out of a faith space, is that loss of community. And the community that I've been able to find through podcasting has just been amazing. Like I've got to meet really cool people. Like we mentioned, Trip Fuller and Dan Koch. Both of them have been instrumental in my own kind of podcasting experience. And they've helped connect me with a bunch of cool different podcasts in the same space of people asking, the same kind of questions and being open to it, being able to, be fully yourself and ask questions without people thinking less of you, that kind of thing. So I think these online communities and spaces, although I don't think they can replace in-person community, they certainly fill a void or a need. And then, once a year, I do the theology beer camp thing, where like all of these kind of virtual spaces come together in person. And I don't know, that's something I look forward to every year. The community that's been created there is, I don't have enough words to describe how meaningful that's been to me, and how helpful it's been in just being able to, like I said, be myself and wrestle with these kind of big questions together with other people doing the same thing.
Yeah. I want to talk more about Theology Beer Camp, because that's been kind of sort of a critical experience for me as well. Yeah. And I'm with you. Like, I don't know that I can fully articulate what it has meant to me, especially being able to go with a friend of mine. So I mentioned we ended up in a United Methodist camp. What happened was the people who were running the camp had a vendetta against the camp director who had hired me. We found ourselves right smack in the middle of some drama that wound up getting him fired. So he hired us, and then we helped get him fired. But I was able to reconcile with him. And actually, over the past 5 years, he's become one of my closest friends. He got me onto Theology Beer Camp. He's like a podcast aficionado, and had followed Trip for a long time, and Dan and some other people, and found out about Theology Beer Camp and was like, hey, I think you should go with me. And so the last 2 years I've gone with him, and it's been difficult. Like I started therapy a year ago, so the last Theology Beer Camp was still pretty difficult. But I'm excited for this year. I think I'll be able to enter into those spaces without some of the like knee-jerk reaction to the trauma that I've had in years past that have led me to leave and miss out on like keynotes and things like that, because I can't stand to be in that space. So I'd find myself like outside wanting to smoke a cigarette or something like that. But this time around, like, I'm very excited. I've talked through and walked through some of this stuff in such a way that like this podcast is a direct result of being able to feel like in a place where I can address this stuff again without letting the trauma like overwhelm me and dictate whether or not I can or cannot do something. But Theology Beer Camp, the thing that we talked about last year at Theology Beer Camp was sort of what's next. What is the church becoming? And that's a major theme that I wanted to pick up in this podcast, in wanting to discuss and help people to figure out like what's the next step in their journey. How do you become a part of a community where you can like find what you had before or something better than what you had before with people that believe the same way? So an expression of your faith that makes sense, like you said, without having to cross your fingers. But yeah, like what do you think community looks like? How's the landscape of faith and spirituality evolving, particular for those that are moving away from traditional evangelicalism and embracing a spiritual but not religious identity? Like, how do we form a community? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the $1 million question, or at least one of them. Yeah, because I mean, I think it does begin with creating spaces where people can come. I'm going to start using very Christianese language that, but I'm trying to hopefully say something different. But like a genuine space where people can actually come and fully be themselves, that doesn't have any kind of like agenda, doesn't see people as a project that we have to like somehow get them to believe the right things or, check the right boxes or join the right serving team or something like that, but rather fostering these kind of communities where people can, break bread together and can, mourn together when we need to mourn or be happy together when we need to be happy. I feel like organically is the best kind of way for that to happen.
Right.
Because I get nervous when we start having to put structure to things, but also I don't know how to do community without structure.
Right. Right.
So like I don't have any good thoughts or ideas on how to make that happen, but there are spaces that come to mind that it's like if we can replicate this in communities, that'd be awesome. Like one of the places that was the most meaningful to me when I stopped being a pastor and kind of lost a lot of that community was a place called Full Tilt Brewing. It's the second place I ever brewed for. And the community there, made up of just the locals and the regulars, was amazing. It was really cool. It was people from all different walks of life who genuinely cared for each other, and would come together. And, like I said earlier, all those kind of things, like we would break bread together. Obviously, we would drink together because it was in a brewery. But we like looked out for each other, and people would, if I don't know, one of the couples that came in all the time is about to have a baby. Oh, well, guess what? Like we have all this old baby stuff that we can give you. Like it really, this kind of intentional community formed in a bar.
Yeah.
But it was organic. And not tied down. So I don't.
Could you pinpoint like a theme or like an idea that it really was at the core of what everybody gathered around, or was it just a vibe?
Yeah, it felt like just the vibe. Like Full Tilt really felt like a place for people to come and just hang out. And I don't know, simple like full recognitions that like life is hard and like being a human sucks sometimes, but also it can be super beautiful. And so I think, that was kind of at the core. And it's not, it was neat because there was people who, like one of the people that came in all the time was a Methodist pastor, right? But then there are also people who are like staunch atheists that thought it was so dumb that this guy spent his life being a pastor, and one of the owners was kind of, more religious and Christian and would go to kind of like an evangelical church that I probably wouldn't be comfortable in. And then the other one was like a former Catholic who didn't want anything to do with religion. But there was just this genuine care for each other. And it still exists. I mean, these people, even though Full Tilt's no more, these people are still all my friends. And like even the guy yesterday that I helped Well, now I'm going to sound like I'm patting myself on the back. I'm not trying to do that. But the guy yesterday that I helped, we drove up to Philly or down, whatever direction Pennsylvania is from Maryland. And
You're up and east
yeah.
a little bit.
So went to Philadelphia, drove 2 hours and 45 minutes to pick up baby furniture for him and his wife. I met him at Full Tilt. That's how I know him.
Nice.
So yeah, I don't know. It's not really an answer to your question. It's more so just a hope and a vision.
Right. I have the same hope and vision. Like I don't know that I consider myself a Christian anymore.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
such
with
a
you.
problematic term.
It is.
It's problematic community, problematic people. But what I want are the things that particularly evangelical Christianity is really good at creating and providing. And one of those is community. So yeah, like that's a huge focus. But I'm with you. It's kind of mysterious the way that good communities sort of form themselves. The only thing that I can readily identify is that the soil that seems to be the most fertile is just non-judgment. Just a community of people or a group of people that are mature enough individually or at a certain place developmentally where they can hold certain things very loosely. And one of those things is, passing judgment on somebody else for whatever reason, different views or different ideas, different theologies. There's not like an impulse to say, well, that's wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong. There's just like a desire to let people just live, like just do you, and I'll do me. That disposition allows you to interact with people in such a way that you can be shaped, informed. Somebody else's life can make a difference in your life. And I mean, that's open relational.
Very much so.
That's what we're talking about. That's why that theology makes so much sense. So I wish that there were a way, not to systematize it, but I really need a place like that.
Yeah.
I need a theology beer camp like here locally so that I can connect with some people and do that kind of thing on a regular basis and not just wait, every year to do it.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, dude. And I think, I don't know, even like, so I play ice hockey, and the community of like being on a team also has been deeply meaningful and helpful. For what it's worth, I've found that to be beneficiary. Like I love playing hockey, but going and just being with this group of dudes who are all very different from me and who have a wide variety of political perspectives and persuasions, people that I probably would not choose to hang out with, coming together to get our asses kicked together as a shitty hockey team is a lot of fun. But I think what you're saying though, I think is right. And this is kind of like the punk rock anarchy side coming out of me. But I think the non-judgment but also like communities that also seeks the well-being of the other. So like it has to be like this mutually transformative space where we're open to encounter with the other. And
that's
so I
called
think
empathy, kids. We're talking about empathy.
It is called empathy. And so I think that's important too. Like the disposition of people in those spaces really matters. And I think it starts with you and I, dude. Like, I don't know that we're going to be able to like go just find this somewhere. Part of me just wonders if like we just have to help create it ourselves. And it starts by how we live and how we choose to interact with those around us and, things like that. So,
it's funny that you say that. Like that was the call that I experienced to be a pastor. That was the whole point. If not now, then when? If not me, then who? Kind of sentiment of, I feel this way and I want to do these things. So like, I'm supposed to go out and do these things and feel this way and be this kind of person out in the world. That is the lightning rod that, like you said, the invitation to go deep enough into your own story. I would say the invitation to go deep enough into your own like character, your own identity, that others will find themselves there or will be attracted to that.
Mm.
My buddy, we were talking about the word winsome the other day. We don't use that word enough. There's not enough people that are winsome. Like the idea of being somebody that is attracted to people and that attracts people to themselves, like just by being a decent person.
Right.
Like that's the key. We've got to be decent people and non-judgmental. Anyway, we're getting close. We're going to solve this.
Yeah. Work it all out.
So what are you currently most curious about or wrestling with in your own faith journey? What kinds of things in terms of community, especially that seems to be a core value? What things are you wrestling with to try to resolve those ideas and desires?
There's a variety of things that I've been wrestling with, and I'm going to try to string them together, and I don't know if it'll make sense. But one of the things that I've been wrestling with most recently, and like at the core of my faith, is like if I even believe in God or not. Which I think has been the most difficult. You know, I do this bit where I'll ask people what's the most difficult aspect of their faith that they had to rethink. And I think for me, this has been that, because there's so much tied in. Like I want to believe in God. I really do. And like there's just so much that makes it seem incredulous, basically.
Yeah.
But I have the desire for it, which is why I think radical theology has been so helpful. Because like, you know, Derrida would often say like he rightly passes for an atheist. And like if people want to call him an atheist, that's fine. And then like Caputo picks up that language. And I mean, I think to an extent they kind of are atheists, but I also think there's something more going on there. So wrestling with that has been difficult. I think exploring like another area that's actually stemmed from some really good conversations I've had at Theology Beer Camp with, you know, shout out Billy Horde. Billy's a fantastic human being. If none of you have heard of Billy, go check out her Substack. She's a wonderful human. But I've had, you know, talk to her about a lot of questions around like gender, sexuality, these kind of things. And like I'm a straight dude, but I also like feel like I don't fit that category either. And so there's like wrestling, you know, she gave me this beautiful phrase, queering your straightness. And then recently I had a friend of mine make a passing comment and he called me straight-ish. He was like, well, you're like a straight-ish dude, Josh. And at first I was like, the fuck do you mean, man? But I've actually coming to embrace that I think has been interesting, and it's opened me up to just looking at people in general hopefully in a much more open way, and being more gracious with myself and being able to ask myself difficult and uncomfortable questions and being okay with where that leads me. So the God thing, the gender sexuality thing has been interesting. And I think also just the community question that you've brought up has been on my mind a lot. And I've been trying to read and learn more about like community organizing and these kind of things. And, you know, I had a really great conversation the other day with a writer named Terry Stokes, who wrote a book called Jesus and the Abolitionists. A subtitle is something along the lines of like how anarchist Christianity gives power to the people. And so wrestling with what does it look like to have anarchy in my faith and spirituality, but also in how I live my life. So those three are like the big ones that I'm wrestling with. And so there's a lot of self-exploration going on. Well, actually, all right, I'll throw one more at you. And it's actually, you know, from my reading this morning, I've been thinking like, I have a memento mori tattoo in my arm, which, you know, Latin meaning like, remember your death. And so it says death will know my name. And I have like a skull and roses. And that's kind of like the punk emo side of me coming out. But I think about like death and dying a lot, not in the sense of like, you know, any immediate danger to myself, but I'm very existential thinker. And so I think framing life in the recognition of one's finitude is a worthy task. And so like that's at the heart of things too. Like this morning, I was reading, and I think it's going to make me emotional talking about it, but like I think I read one of the saddest things that I've read in a while this morning in a book called Sex, God, and Rock and Roll, Catastrophes, Epiphanies, and Sacred Anarchies by Barry Taylor. Yeah, he's He's a cool dude. He used to be the road manager for AC/DC. But he talks about a friend of his who committed suicide, and he read a book by a philosopher named Simon Critchley, who's a British philosopher. He's brilliant. And Critchley, his philosophy on suicide is that it's impossible to commit suicide, but it's actually, excuse me, he likened it to murder because he said it's he just basically described it the murder of the hated other, and it just happened to be that the hated other was, you know, these people. So like that adds to, now I'm wrestling more with that around death and stuff, and how that, you know, focuses in on community and providing. Yeah, trying to create communities where that's not a viable option.
Right. I think
yeah.
Sacred space, if community were a sacred space and we were engaged in creating sacred space, there's as much the reality of interacting with and the potential of loving the other as much as there is interacting with and loving like ourselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Like
100%.
being the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
Is part of what that kind of sacred space and that kind of community is about.
Hmm.
So yeah, like I understand the sort of the hated other within ourselves kind of thing. There's a drive inside of us to be the best version of ourselves, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes for some people, and I've experienced this myself, I've struggled with suicidal ideation and mental health issues for a while. The idea that my past self, or that the self that I'm wrestling with as the hated other, like I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. And I think that community is what helps to create a space or set a stage for us to be able to reconcile with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, being a human is hard, and life is a difficult thing. And so just, you know, being able to come together and recognize just as fellow humans, you know, I think in the intro to my podcast, I have this bit where I'm like, so if like you're a, you know, strong believer or like a bold atheist or just somebody trying to figure out what it means to be human. And I think that's the group of people that I've mostly been interested in connecting with, is people just trying to figure out what the fuck it means to be human and how can we do this together. And when we can come together around powerful symbols, you know, in religion, in my case, Christianity, if they work to cultivate that kind of space, then great. And if not, then maybe they're not worthy. And sometimes symbols need to die.
Yeah.
Yeah. So forgive me. I didn't expect to go in that direction, but
no, I appreciate it. I think it's all important. It's part of the makeup of the character that we're talking about, what this community looks like, what we look like as people who want to be involved in communities like this. I think those are important questions to ask and things to reconcile with. I think it was one of your last interviews we were talking about. Your guest was talking about mushroom trips.
Dana Hicks. Yeah.
Dana Hicks. Okay. So, but Dana was talking about identity, like sort of in what we've been talking about in terms of, you know, reconciling with ourselves and what I just lost my train of thought.
No, you're good.
But the idea of, he told a story about being on one of the trips, and there was a guy that was on the trip with him who went and talked to a tree and basically said, you know, I'm sorry for what we've been, I'm sorry for what we've done to you and for how we've treated the environment and kind of thing. And the response from the tree was, you know, don't worry, man. I've been here longer than you, and I'll be here when you're gone, kind of thing. But the idea of us being a part of a whole, like that's what I was getting at. The you know, the recognition that we are connected to each other in deep and irrevocable ways, like is part of the realization that we have to make to create and to be a part of communities that are sacred space like that, like recognizing that, my journey is hard, your journey is hard, but that we have the opportunity to experience this life together and go through these things together. Like that's sort of like a key recognition that we need to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of why I love process theology so much, is because it has this deep recognition of the interconnectedness of all things, and not in just like a hippy dippy la la kind of way, but like in the most literal possible meaning. Everything is interconnected and intertwined. We don't have to get into how the metaphysics works, but or philosophy of organism, as Whitehead actually called it, is an event-based ontology. It's not substance-based. And so it's constantly like this energy field interacting with itself, basically. And so we are deeply interconnected. And I think, too, like to use, maybe I'm going to try to recapture and redefine a word that's abused often, I think, in Christian spaces, which is sin. I think sin arises from giving into the illusion that we are separate. And, Whitehead talks about people taking abstract things and then making them concrete and then living your life as if they're the thing. That's called the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And I think giving into the myth of separation, we're all committing the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, because when we believe that we're separate from each other, I can be racist, I can be sexist, I can be homophobic, and do terrible things to you. When I believe I'm separate from the environment or creation, if you want to call it creation, then we can, commit ecological genocide and destroy the world like we've been so good at doing in this climate crisis.
Yeah. I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but they were talking about the fact that the humanity is the only species that will be responsible for its own extinction.
Yeah.
Ecological genocide is the macro picture of what you're talking about. The idea that we're disconnected. The macro idea of that being these people who walk around having come from the earth and will one day return to the earth. Thinking none of this matters. I don't give a shit about any of this, and it'll all take care of itself, and I don't have to do anything about it.
Yeah, and I think there's this lie in some parts of Christianity where we're told that humans kind of were like zapped onto the earth, when the reality is we grew out of it. Like Whitehead would say, humans are not an exception to the universe, but an exemplification of it.
I love that line.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think recognizing how deeply interconnected we are to creation and to each other, to ourselves, there's a lot of separation that exists within ourselves, and doing the kind of difficult and painful inner work of reconciling that, like having grace for past versions of Josh, who was just like trying to do the best he could with what he had at the time. That's like difficult, right? But it's worth it. And then and this is, where I get hung up, because like I told you, I'm wrestling with do I believe in God or not. But I think belief in separation from God, I think is also harmful. And so, I think that causes all sorts of terrible things, like war and killing people because their religion looks different than ours. Also it causes lots of shame and guilt, and prevents human flourishing, which like all of that meets the criteria for Dr. Leah Robinson, practical theologian, for her criterion of bad theology.
Right.
So we need to get over this separation stuff and come together. And I don't know.
No. What you said reminded me of Theopoetics and the Theopoetics of Christianity. In the idea that we're separate from the earth, or that we're separate from God. Like there's a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, or creation out of nothing, like that's not a thing in the Theopoetics of the Bible. It very distinctly creates an image of a God who creates space within God's self for creation. So it's not out of nothing. Like Not only do we look at the scripture that talks through the creation story, and there are things that seem to exist, that like basic elements that God works with to create, but the whole idea of the creation story paints this image of a God who creates space within God's self. And then the other thing is, like, just looking at the creation story, like taking it for face value, it says that God took clay or dirt, and that's how God formed humanity. So this idea that we're disconnected, like it's completely separate from the scriptures that tell the story of our origins. I don't understand why. That was one of the hardest things for me, and one of the topics of deconstruction that came up so often was just ecological justice. I cannot understand a church who believes in a creator that is responsible for everything that we see around us, and in a creation that we are a part of, could just have no concern whatsoever for what's going on in the world, or can have so little concern for what's going on in the world. And it comes down to terrible eschatologies, and the idea that we're going to be caught up in heaven and not have to deal with all this shit, once it hits the fan. Like, but still, even that, like, I don't understand how you take that position when the God that you worship is the God that created all things. Like, shouldn't we at least be good stewards of everything that we're a part of here? Shouldn't it have some impact on how we behave ourselves?
One would think. Yeah, and I think too, like, I mean, I agree, like, eschatology point, well taken. And I think part of it too, like, if we go like another layer deeper, is the kind of dualism that exists in much of Christianity, I think is not helpful, where we believe that, like, the body, body and soul, and the thing that really matters is this ethereal soul thing that we have that'll float off into space one day when we die. And it detaches us from our bodies, which then also, it's like matter, creation is evil and bad, and the good thing is, our soul. So, like, none of this stuff here really matters. I think that's also why, like, Christians are so obsessed with, like, who people are having sex with, because it's a dualism. It's a non-embodied experience, and, like, our bodies are evil and wicked and gross. And yeah, so I think getting a better, understanding of who we are, that's also in process. Most process thinkers are pan-experientialists or panpsychists, where instead of this dualism, they call it dual aspect monism, that matter and spirit, if you want to call it spirit, or matter and consciousness, matter and mind, are two sides of the same coin. So they're not separate. And we can get this deep embodiment, which I think we need to ground ourselves in that sense. Like, we need to have both the transcendent and the immanent, and often we focus too much on one over the other. Right.
So this informs my idea of resurrection.
Cool.
So that's a different story for a different time. But the laws of thermodynamics, physics, the first law of thermodynamics is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So the idea that who you are, body and spirit, like, those are interconnected, and those also, neither of them are destroyed. Like, there's always perpetuity, and that is part of the interconnectedness of the universe. Like, it's not that your body will always exist, but you as a physical being can always exist in relation to the rest of creation, because that's how it works.
Yeah, it's almost like the I don't know, in Buddhism sometimes they talk about, like, a wave returning to the ocean. It's kind of like that. Or, I mean, even if you think about, like, how, your cells are constantly dying, and, like, the, last time I was together with you in person, even though, like, you're still you, like, physically now you're a completely different you than you were last time I saw you, back in October. And so it's this constant change. And, the ocean imagery is helpful for me. But yeah, that's the whole process thing too, right? Is that it's not static. Like we're not these
Right.
static substances that just are, bouncing into each other, but everything is in process. It's this ongoing, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
No, I agree.
it's so much more intuitive. It makes sense with like quantum physics and yeah, what like you're saying, the law of thermodynamics, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. The belief in something that matches with our experience and with
Yes.
the knowledge that we have. And do we have it all figured out? No, absolutely not. Like there's still things that we're learning about. We know more about outer space than we do about our own oceans on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But the process of discovery is gifting us these perspectives that help us to make sense of our existence in like really profound and beautiful ways. And we ignore that to our detriment. Theology should be able to reconcile those things. The theopoetic structure of Christianity should allow people to be able to say, like, no, that makes perfect sense. Like that's what we're talking about in the story of creation, or that's what we're talking about when we talk about death and resurrection. Like these things, this knowledge reinforces what we believe about the universe and how it works and who God is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you keep using the word theopoetics, because that's like nowadays when I do theology, it's always in the realm of theopoetics, which is a weakening of, taking theology. It's a weakening of that logic into a poetics, into a poesis, which is, I don't know, it's more helpful because it's not so tight-fisted. It has room,
Right.
like you're saying, for things to shift and grow and change. And, the way that I like to say it is like, I believe in the mythopoetic structure of the Christian tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a good story. Whether or not there's representational truth to all of it, I don't know. I think it's also true. Like I want to love my neighbor as myself. I want to believe that the truest thing about me and you is that I'm known, that we're known, seen, and loved by God. Like those are all beautiful things. And to operate within that kind of theopoetic space, I think provides helpful, like meaning-making tools for existence that can, I don't know, hopefully make us less shitty people.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, we've talked about some things that you're wrestling with. I'm curious, realistically, what are some things that bring you joy or sustain you on this journey of deconstruction? What are the ideas that really enliven you and give you hope for what's going on?
Yeah, so things that bring me joy is meeting cool people like you, and getting to have conversations like this is always very sustaining. Like theological ideas though that keep me going though and this is where I think both process and radical theology serve me well here. Within process thought, you still have something like, God. It looks very different than the God of classical theism.
Mm-hmm.
But God in process thought is present in and through all things at all times, constantly luring creation forward into what's good and beautiful and true. And then what happens is creation responds to this lure, and in each moment, God takes in the response of creation, evaluates it, and then offers the next best thing. And this is a constant process that God is doing. And so you and I are being invited in each moment of our becoming to actualize what's good and beautiful and true. And so that invitation to be a co-creator with the divine gives me hope and gives me joy. And it's not like, hope can often be kind of used as like this kind of boring optimism, but I mean hope in like a participatory hope.
Mm-hmm.
Like hope as a verb, as something that we do and give into. Like that story is good to me, the drive. And then within radical theology, so when I'm like, okay, I don't know if I can posit God today. How it works in radical theology is God is equated to as kind of the unconditional in Derrida. So Derrida talked about the unconditional or the undeconstructible, recognizing that all things are a construct, and if it's constructed, it can be deconstructed.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's looking for the unconditional or the undeconstructible. And one of the words that he uses is justice, and says that like justice is this constant call. It's always this thing on the horizon. It's always this thing to come, but we never quite have it. We can't wrap our arms around it and say we have justice, or like you and I, when this podcast is done, we wipe our hands and say, ah, yes, now we have justice in the world, right? We have laws, and laws try to capture justice, but as you and I are both aware, just because something's a law doesn't mean it's just, and doesn't mean it brings about justice. And so justice is this constant thing we're striving towards. And sometimes we manifest it, but we don't know until after the fact, right? This is, Caputo calls this a theology of the event. We can look back and be like, in that moment, there was justice. And so then Caputo takes that idea and applies it to God. God is as the concept of the undeconstructible, the unconditional. And so as soon as we start conditioning God, then we're making God deconstructible. So instead, he wants to say God doesn't exist, but God is an insistence. God is an invitation, a call, a lure. So very similar process language. And whether or not God will have been is up to you and I. Are we going to actualize the divine potential that exists? And that gives me hope, because that gives me, Aaron Simmons defines faith as risk in a direction. And he asks us, what is worthy of your finitude? And like, maybe that's the thing, that's worthy of your, that you should risk yourself in the direction of. And so for me, that's love. And so that's what keeps me going, is I think love is worthy of my finitude. I want to risk myself in the direction of love being the most powerful thing in the universe, whether that means I'm into process theology one day and I'm partnering with the divine to, bring about the good and beautiful and true, or if it's in radical theology where the existence of God is up to you and I want to risk myself in the direction of actualizing God, because I think love is the most powerful thing in the universe. And so that love, I think, really is the heart of it for me. That's the thing that keeps me going. And yeah, if I can use Christian language to point to those things, then great, because the symbols in the Christian faith are powerful. But if not, and I need to use other symbols, that's fine too. But I don't know. I think it's love. Love is the short answer to your question.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
I agree. I agree for sure. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, man. This was fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll have to hang again when we talk about some specific things, but
I'm totally down whenever.
I appreciate your thoughts on, the broad ideas of who we are and, where this is going. And I think I look forward to being a part of, continuing to be a part of the community that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Anyway, where can I point to people? Where can they connect with your work and, learn more about who you are and what you're doing? I definitely want them to listen to Rethinking Faith.
Yeah. So Rethinking Faith, you can find it wherever you like to listen to podcasts. People keep telling me to put it on YouTube, but I'm lazy. So maybe one day I'll get there. But if you look Rethinking Faith up on your, podcast app or whatever, you'll find it. I'm about to launch a website, which is something that I was also told I should have done a long time ago. So I think it's going to be, joshuagpatterson.com, something like that. So that should be coming online soon. But also I'm on, Facebook, Instagram, those kind of things. You can look me up by name, or if you want to just follow Rethinking Faith, has its own Instagram page as well. And so, yeah, those are some fun places. I don't know. I've published some stuff in a few different books. I'm working on some of my own stuff right now. So hopefully all these things to come in the future. But anywhere on the interwebs, I'm around, lurking.
I'm listening to your podcast and engaging with the content that you bring to the forefront. I really appreciate your thoughts and how you're doing everything. So keep up the good work.
Sweet. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, have a good one. Thanks again for your time.
Yeah, likewise, man. Best of luck with everything.